Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to understanding complex ideas and, well, surprising figures from history and thought. Today, we're digging into a really remarkable character, Christopher Caldwell, and his major work, Illusion and Reality, a study of the sources of poetry.
He's definitely someone who defies easy categorization.
Absolutely. And this isn't just, a standard book review. Our goal here is to unpack how Caldwell, this guy who wrote aeronautics textbooks, detective novels, serious fiction, poetry, even invented a new kind of gear.
Yeah, the infinitely variable gear. Quite impressive, actually.
Right. And then ultimately died fighting with a machine gun in the Spanish Civil War. How someone like that saw these really deep connections between poetry, art, society, and, well, consciousness itself. He argued art isn't just like personal expression, it's a vital tool shaped by our world, but also shaping it.
It's a powerful life story feeding into a pretty radical viewpoint. Caldwell, born Christopher St. John Sprigg, that was his real name, in Putney, 1907. Left school super young, 16 and a half, became a reporter.
16, wow.
Yeah. Then moved to London, got into aeronautical publishing, rose right up to editor and director. And that invention, the gear thing, totally real. Designs published in Automobile Engineer, got attention from actual experts.
That's incredible versatility.
And all this before he's even 25. Plus, 5 aeronautics textbooks, 7 detective novels, poems, stories. He used Christopher Caldwell for the serious stuff like his novel This My Hand in 35, which really showed his thinking about psychology.
And then, tragically, Spain.
Yes, the Spanish Civil War. A comrade reported seeing him last covering a retreat, machine gun blazing, enemy forces just yards away. A stark end.
What a life. And you can really see how that kind of intense, varied experience feeds into illusion and reality. His core idea, then, is that art, particularly literature, you can't just judge it on its own, like in a vacuum.
Exactly. Not just based on, say, pure aesthetics or literary technique alone. He argues that where art comes from, its sources are not irrelevant. In fact, they're crucial. Art, for him, is deeply rooted in what he called the developing complex of real social life.
So a materialist approach, grounded in, well, reality.
That's the term he uses, yeah. A materialist approach. It means he rejects formalism. The idea you can just analyze technique and form without considering the artist or the subject.
Right.
And he also rejects idealism, explaining art just through big abstract ideas like beauty or truth.
Yeah.
For Caldwell, theory and practice, thinking and doing, they're always linked. You have to understand concrete living, the actual material way people live, before you can understand things like philosophy or art that come out of that living.
Okay, so art isn't floating free. It's anchored in, well, in how we live and organize ourselves.
That's the fundamental point.
Yeah.
It's never divorced from the material conditions.
So if it's that grounded, where does something like poetry even start? How does he trace its origins?
Well, he looks way back. He points out poetry is pretty much universal. You find it everywhere. Ancient Greece, Scandinavia, Anglo-Saxon England, India, China, Japan, Egypt.
Across the board.
Right. And it starts, he says, as a kind of heightened form of ordinary speech. It stands out because it has formal structures. Meter, rhyme, alliteration, regular stress, that sort of thing.
Like old sayings or spells.
Exactly. Think about the earliest words people tried to preserve: weather saws, farming tips, magic spells, religious rituals. They almost always tend towards this heightened rhythmic language.
Makes sense.
And often this language went hand in hand with music or some kind of basic rhythm like chanting. Caldwell even suggests music and poetry might have started together, maybe linked to dance. He notes that even in classical Athens, they didn't always draw a sharp line between the two.
Interesting. What about the mindset behind it? He mentioned the primitive mind.
Yeah, he makes a point about attention spans. He suggests early peoples could focus intensely on things that mattered to them, like a ritual or a hunt, maybe more so than modern people often do. And for them, words weren't just labels. They held power, almost magical power.
Magical power, how so?
They were looking for a kind of magic puppet image in words. Think of it like making an effigy of an enemy. They believed that by operating on the word image, they could actually influence reality.
So not just describing something, but doing something with words.
Precisely. The whole idea of a cold statement, just a purely objective scientific description that mirrors reality, that was alien to them. They'd see that as kind of weak compared to actually engaging with the world through these potent charged words.
Wow. Okay, so poetry isn't just about sounding nice or expressing feelings. It actually had a job to do in early societies.
A crucial one, according to Caldwell. He argues it grew directly out of the economic life of the tribe. See, unlike animals acting purely on instinct, even simple tribal life needs efforts that aren't instinctive, like everyone working together for a
Right,
harvest.
coordination.
Exactly. And poetry, especially within the context of a group festival or ritual, became a social mechanism. It helped harness the tribe's collective instincts and emotions and direct them towards these non-biological economic goals.
How does a festival achieve that?
Well, the festival takes a real, tangible goal, like bringing in the harvest, and transforms it into something. Well, he uses the word fantastic, meaning illusory, but in a productive way. It creates a kind of collective illusion.
An illusion.
Yeah, but a necessary one. This shared emotional experience, this collective illusion, helps educate and adapt the individual to social life. Think about initiation rites, marriage ceremonies, harvest festivals. They all use heightened language, ritual, emotion to bind the group and prepare people for their social roles and tasks.
So poetry is like society's tool for adapting us.
That's a good way to put it. He says poetry is secreted by society as part of its specifically human adaptation to existence. It adapts the heart to a new purpose, projecting people into this world of fantasy, an imagined world that anticipates a future reality they need to work towards. The illusion helps make the future real.
Okay, that's a really interesting take on poetry's deep function. So what happens as societies get more complex? Does this relationship change?
It definitely evolves. Poetic art, whether it's an epic poem or later a novel, starts being accepted as an illusion, a mock world. We, the audience, give it what Caldwell calls a qualified assent.
Meaning we know it's not literally real.
Right. We don't demand it covertly matches real-life logic. And paradoxically, this acceptance as illusion allows art to be produced more freely, even embrace contradictions without collapsing. He also notes that early religion, or mythology, was tangled up with poetry. It was full of spontaneous inventiveness, maybe even self-contradiction, and deeply connected to the whole society.
But then comes division.
Yes. The big shift Caldwell identifies is when the undifferentiated tribe splits into classes. You get a group managing things, focusing on thought supervisors, and another group doing the physical work laborers.
And this split shows up in art and religion.
Immediately, they stop being truly collective creations. Religion, he argues, tends to become the product or tool of the ruling class. It turns into dogma, a sort of confused perception of society, often arbitrary and enforced. Think about how heresy could become a serious crime.
Yeah.
Caldwell brings in Marx here, noting how religion can act as an inverted consciousness of the world, but also sometimes as a protest against real misery.
So art starts to separate from this kind of formalized religion.
It does. As ruling classes perhaps become a bit cynical about how religion is being used, art begins to chart its own course. Caldwell argues it becomes the primary emotional expression of the ruling class. This sets up a divide. The sophisticated art of the exploiters versus the fairy tale and folk art of the exploited.
And this class division affects the content and form of the art itself.
Profoundly. For example, he suggests that as the exploited class suffers more, their religion might offer an increasingly beautiful afterlife, basically postponing that harvest of fantasy we talked about from this world to the next.
Laying the payoff.
Exactly. Meanwhile, if the ruling class becomes too parasitic, just living off others without contributing much, their art can degenerate. It might become overly rationalistic, almost like dogma itself, or just, pedantic and dry.
And the exploit.
Well, in really oppressive situations like slavery, Caldwell suggests their own spontaneous art forms might wither away entirely, replaced by a kind of fixed dogmatism and superstitious faith imposed from above. But, he adds, new classes can rise up.
Oh, okay.
And when they do, you often get heresies, new religious or artistic movements that challenge the old ossified systems and express the needs and worldview of this rising class.
This feels like it's leading towards his analysis of more modern times, the bourgeois era.
It is. He defines the modern cultural period as starting around the 15th century, built entirely on the economic changes brought by the bourgeois revolution. He echoes Marx again. The bourgeoisie swept away feudal relations, leaving only naked self-interest.
The cash nexus.
Right. And a key feature of this era is constant change, constant revolutionizing of production. Marx's famous line, "All that is solid melts into air." Caldwell sees this reflected directly in bourgeois art. Any artist who just sticks to the old rules becomes academic, stale, lifeless. You have to keep up with the change.
And central to this bourgeois era is individualism.
That's Caldwell's core analysis of the period. The bourgeois illusion, he calls it. The bourgeois individual sees himself as this heroic figure, fighting alone for freedom against society's constraints, the natural man.
Like Robinson Crusoe, almost.
Sort of, yeah. And while this drive did lead to huge technical advances, Caldwell argues it ultimately creates its opposite, blind coercion. Things like war, economic chaos, slumps, even revolution.
How does individualism lead to its opposite?
Through inherent contradictions. The ideal of the free market ends up producing monopolies and trusts. The fight against feudal kings leads to a powerful, centralized bourgeois state. Individualism, paradoxically, generates anti-individualism.
I see. And this tension, this contradiction, that's what bourgeois poetry reflects.
Precisely. It expresses both the optimistic bourgeois illusion of freedom and the underlying awareness of social forces, social necessity, that constrain that freedom. It's a poetry of conflict.
So how does he see this playing out in specific English poets?
He maps it quite carefully. He starts with the Elizabethans, Shakespeare, Marlowe, etc. This is the era of primitive accumulation, early capitalism. He sees their work expressing the sort of princely bourgeois will. Shakespeare's big tragic heroes, Lear, Hamlet, Macbeth, are all about these immense unmeasured wills clashing with reality.
Even Shakespeare.
Oh, yeah. He even reads The Tempest in this light, sees Prospero harnessing nature's forces as a kind of bizarre forecast of communism, with Ariel representing the free wage laborer. It's a specific reading, of course.
Definitely a unique take. What comes after the Elizabethans?
Then you get the transition towards revolution, the Puritan era. The monarch's absolute will starts to decay. Puritan poets like Milton react against the perceived decadence of court life. Caldwell reads Milton as a revolutionary figure.
How so, with Paradise Lost?
Yes. He argues Milton casts himself as the defiant Satan in Paradise Lost, then as Samson in Samson Agonistes, hoping to pull down the temple on his enemies. But then in Paradise Regained, Caldwell sees a kind of defeatism, the illusion becoming a little self-conscious.
Interesting. And the 18th century?
The Restoration poets like Dryden reflect the confused but rapid shifts of the bourgeoisie. Then 18th century poetry, Pope and others, embodies the spirit of manufacture, a slower, more protected phase of early capitalism.
Until the Industrial Revolution hits properly.
Right. That's the explosive stage. Capitalism really starts transforming everything into that callous cash nexus.
Yeah.
And this is where poets increasingly feel like individuals removed from society. Their poems become ends in themselves.
The art for art's sake idea is starting to brew.
Exactly. Caldwell sees this as the final explosive movement of the bourgeois contradiction. And it sparks the Romantic Revolution. Blake, Byron, Keats, Wordsworth, Shelley. He calls it a revolt of feeling against the cold formalism that came before.
How does he differentiate them?
He sees Byron as the aristocrat aware of his own class breaking up. Wordsworth and Shelley, influenced by Rousseau, searching for freedom in nature.
And Keats, you mentioned him earlier.
Keats is particularly important for Caldwell. He argues Keats is the first great poet to really feel the strain of being an artist producing for the free market rather than for patrons.
How does that show up in his poetry?
Caldwell points to poems like Isabella, where the world of love is shattered by the two money-grubbing brothers, or La Belle Dame sans merci, where beauty is fleeting, a brief delight. He argues this tension, this intrusion of economic reality into the poetic world, shaped Keats's language, which then became dominant for later poetry.
So the market itself starts to warp the art.
That's the argument, which leads him into the Victorian era and the decline. Poets like Arnold, Swinburne, Tennyson, Browning, they represent the tragic stage.
Tragic how?
Well, Tennyson's In Memoriam, for instance, reflects deep pessimism. Caldwell connects its themes of struggle to Darwinism, seeing it project the individual struggle for existence onto nature itself. Swinburne takes Shelley's idealistic world and makes it even more detached, more separate from reality.
And this is where art for art's sake really takes hold.
Yes, and Caldwell links it to what Marx called commodity fetishism. The idea is the poet is producing for this anonymous, blind, strange, passive market, thanks to mass printing. They lose direct connection to and control over the social impact of their work.
So the art object becomes a thing in itself, detached.
Exactly. Art becomes art for art's sake. Skill becomes skill fetishism technique valued purely for its own sake, explicitly against any social function. Poetry gets more highbrow, difficult. Its skills maybe not even wanted by a mass audience consuming lowbrow art.
Which leads to
poets retreating into increasingly private worlds, selecting bizarre, strange, fantastic personal associations. He points to movements like the Parnassians, symbolists, surrealists as examples of a kind of regression towards mythology, but without the original shared social meaning. It
Yep.
becomes purely individual.
Okay, that's a huge sweep through literary history, all seen through this socioeconomic lens. So stepping back, how does Caldwell actually define poetry's essential nature, especially modern poetry?
He boils it down to a few core characteristics. He says modern poetry is 1, rhythmical, 2, not translatable. Its meaning is bound up in the actual sounds and structure of the original language.
Right, unlike a novel, which usually translates. Okay.
Precisely. 3, it's irrational. It doesn't follow everyday logic. 4, it's non-symbolic, meaning it's not just a simple code where X stands for Y. 5, it's concrete. It deals in specific images and sensations. And 6, it has condensed aesthetic effects. It packs a big emotional punch in a small space.
And he links it to dreams.
He does. He sees strong similarities. Both poetry and dreams are non-symbolic in that direct way. Both are irrational. And the way they flow seems governed by emotional connections, not logic.
How does rhythm play into this?
He calls poetry's rhythm a form of physiological introversion. Unlike a novel, which builds a world outside you, poetry's rhythm, the beat, the sound patterns draws attention inward to your own body's responses, pulse, breath. It emphasizes the feeling tone of the words themselves.
So it makes you focus on your internal state.
Yeah, he puts it quite strongly. Rhythm distorts and denies the structure of reality to exalt the structure of the self. It lets the subjective experience, the feeling side of things, emerge and take precedence over the objective external world, at least for that moment.
That really clarifies the difference he sees between poetry and the novel.
Absolutely. The novel builds that mock reality, right? Its emotional power comes from the story, the characters, the events within that constructed world.
Which is why plot is so important in novels, but less so maybe in lyric poetry.
Exactly. And why novels translate reasonably well. Poetry's emotional charge is tied directly to the words themselves, their sound, their texture. That's why things like rhythm, word choice, style feel so essential to poetry in a way they aren't, or are less so for the novel.
Okay. He also talks about the act of creating art, something about negation.
Ah, yes, negation of the negation. It sounds complex, but the idea is basically dialectical. An artist encounters new life experiences that's practice. This new experience might clash with or challenge existing art forms or ways of seeing the world that's theory or existing consciousness.
So reality challenges the old ideas.
Right. That challenge, that inadequacy of the old forms, is the first negation. The new artwork that the artist creates tries to resolve this conflict, to synthesize the old consciousness with the new experience. It's the negation of the negation. It's a new stage of understanding.
And great art for him does this synthesis with important shared experiences.
Yes, it has to integrate experiences that are important and general, things that resonate widely. It touches on those deep emotional drives and fundamental human instincts, the skeleton, he calls it, or the social ego. Great art expresses the general experiences of men in that age.
It connects the individual to the collective.
That's the idea. And he sees language itself as working this way too. A word isn't just a label. It has an objective side pointing to something in the world, but also a subjective side, its feeling tone, the emotions it evokes.
Both perception and feeling.
Right. And language as a whole builds both our shared picture of reality, which science refines, and our shared inner world of feeling, which art explores. He argues we only really understand either world through social interaction, driven by our fundamental need to engage with and change reality.
This sounds like it leads into his critique of psychology, like Freud and Jung.
It does. He argues that Freudian concepts like the pleasure principle versus the reality principle, repression, wish fulfillment, suffer from what he calls a bourgeois approach, meaning they isolate the individual psyche from its social and material context.
They treat the mind as if it exists in a vacuum.
Pretty much. Caldwell's counterargument is that consciousness is a social product. Our instincts, he says, are initially blind and only become free when they are shaped and directed by society. So things like neurotic conflicts aren't just individual pathologies caused by civilization. They're actually reflections of the real conflict between basic human drives and the specific demands and contradictions of environmental reality, especially within a class society. The problem isn't just internal. It mirrors external social conflicts.
So neurosis reflects social dysfunction.
In his view, yes. And he critiques Jung similarly, seeing his ideas of archetypes and psychological truth as too idealistic, detached from material conditions. He thinks both Freud and Jung missed the economic basis of consciousness.
So their therapies might help individuals cope, but don't address the root social causes.
That's his assessment. They offer local and particular therapeutic value, but can't offer a fundamental solution because they don't grasp the social dimension. He contrasts this pathology view with art and science.
How does he see art and science in relation to madness?
He defines madness, whether it's distorting external reality or internal reality, as consciousness getting out of gear with reality. But art and science, he argues, are healthy ways of engaging with the world. They are externalizations of dream.
Healthy externalizations.
Yes, art resolves social conflict through conscious illusion. It helps us process emotions and adapt feelings. Science resolves conflict through impersonal truth. It helps us understand and change external reality. Both, when healthy, lead towards greater reality, consciousness, and publicity, meaning shared understanding.
Okay, so art and science are adaptive tools, whereas madness is a maladaptive state.
That's the distinction he draws.
Looking forward then, Caldwell, writing in the 1930s, he saw bourgeois culture as being in crisis.
Deep crisis. A final crisis, he called it. He argued that the very contradictions that drove capitalism's success were now tearing it apart.
What contradictions specifically?
Things like highly organized production inside factories versus chaotic competition between businesses based on private profit. Having the ability to produce huge amounts of goods versus deliberately restricting production for market reasons. Amazing international communication versus intense nationalism. Scientific progress alongside the fragmentation of knowledge into narrow specialisms.
A system working against itself.
Essentially. And the core contradiction, for him, remained that bourgeois illusion, defining freedom as simply ignoring social constraints, anarchic ignorance of social relations. This kind of freedom, he argued, inevitably leads to one class monopolizing wealth and power, denying real freedom to others.
And the solution, in his view.
Given his analysis, he saw communism as the inevitable solution. He believed the proletariat, the working class, organized by the very conditions of industrial production, would eventually overthrow the bourgeois system.
Leading to a new kind of art, proletarian art.
Yes. He envisioned an emerging proletarian art that would express the consciousness and aims of this rising class.
Yeah.
He predicted its consciousness would be of a higher quality than bourgeois art, because it wouldn't be based on the limited perspective of one exploiting class, but potentially encompass the whole of society.
So more universal, in a way.
That's the aspiration. He hoped it would eventually become communist art, growing organically from the collective, like ancient tribal art, but incorporating all the technical skills and complexity developed throughout history.
What does this mean for artists living through this transition, according to him, say bourgeois artists?
He saw three main paths for them. One was opposition, basically resisting the change, maybe retreating into older, even barbaric forms. He associated this tendency with fascism.
Okay.
The second was alliance, becoming fellow travelers. These might be romantic revolutionaries, attracted to the idea of overthrowing the old, but maybe struggling to integrate with the constructive phase of building something new.
And the third?
Assimilation. This means fully merging with the proletariat, accepting its goals and organization. He saw this as rare, but the most transformative path for an artist coming from a bourgeois background. True communist art, he thought, would ultimately come from this kind of synthesis, the proletariat absorbing and transforming the best of the old consciousness.
So throughout all this, art retains a fundamental purpose for Caldwell.
Absolutely. Its core job is always to adapt the psyche to the environment. It's essential for social progress. Art helps remold external reality nearer to the heart's desire. It takes bits of the world and reshapes them, distorts them to reflect our inner needs and instincts.
Even difficult art, like tragedy.
Yes, even tragedy. Great art makes reality more interesting because more true, he says. It helps us get to grips with it. It shows us possibilities, how we should like our own lives to be, helping us feel richly and strenuously.
It helps us understand ourselves.
Profoundly. It lets us look directly at ourselves, our inner lives, which is hard to do otherwise. He has this great formulation. Art is all active cognition, knowing through doing making, while science is all cognitive action, acting based on knowing. Art is the science of feeling, science the art of knowing.
Wow.
And importantly, art arises from that healthy struggle between fantasy, our desires, imagination, and reality, the external world. This isn't a neurotic conflict, but a necessary one rooted in social life and the need for change.
So what's his final vision for art under communism? How would it be different?
He believed it would overcome the deadness he saw in much modern poetry, which he felt had narrowed its focus, excluding the vulgarized values of a society he saw as decaying. The communist poet, he hoped, would speak in the old noble way, with a richer shared world of values backing up the language.
Would individuality disappear?
No, quite the opposite. He argued individuality would gain a more elaborate and deeper meaning, precisely because it would be a collective meaning. A truly great man or great artist isn't just unique, but embodies something significant for the collective.
A return to a collective focus, but on a higher level.
Exactly. A return to the outward-looking focus of primitive communism, but enriched by all the complexity and knowledge gained through history. The communist poet wouldn't be lost in purely private symbols, but concerned with their individual experience in relation to others within a real communicating world.
So the tragedy of art in his time was its isolation and feeling of futility.
Yes, a tragedy of will that does not understand itself. The individual, unaware of the social forces shaping them, is basically a slave to those forces. Art, for Caldwell, is ultimately the privilege of the free, and freedom requires a conscious understanding of necessity of social relations. Its future depends on achieving that understanding.
We've covered a huge amount of ground there, from primitive chants to revolutionary politics, all through the lens of poetry and art. Caldwell's view really ties art inextricably to the way society works, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Whether one agrees with his specific political conclusions or not, his central argument that art is never created in a vacuum, that it's profoundly interwoven with social life, economics, and our collective consciousness is incredibly powerful. It forces you to look at art and society differently.
It certainly offers a compelling framework for understanding why art matters and how it functions beyond just aesthetics. So maybe a final thought for you to consider. If Caldwell is right, even partly that art reflects and shapes our social reality, acting as a kind of mirror, what does the art we create and consume today say about us? What kind of society are we currently building or resisting as reflected in our own cultural illusions and realities?